Good evening, everybody. I will call to order the Arvada City Council workshop for today, July 8th, 2025. Ms. Rush, if you'll do the roll call. Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
Here.
Councilmember Ambrose. Councilmember Davis.
Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer. Councilmember Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Rupert.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to excuse Councilmembers Ambrose and Councilmember Pfeiffer from tonight's proceedings and workshops.
Thank you. All votes are cast. That passes 5-0. Councilmember Pfeiffer and Councilmember Ambrose are excused absences. We have need for 2 workshops this evening. The first will be our shared micromobility update. There we go. Welcome.
Hello, good evening. I'm Aslan Drosky. I joined the city in February as the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator, and as part of my role in that position, I did take over management of our micromobility program. And so I'm really excited to be here tonight to present you all a 3-year progress report on the program. So we're going to go through a few things this evening, starting with some background and information on how the program operates. We'll move into some information about how we engage with and educate the community and receive feedback from them. And then we'll talk about some really exciting data regarding how we monitor program performance and what that data is telling us. And we'll end with some recommendations for the continuance of the program. So first, starting with our overview of program operations, it's really important for us to have a definition for shared micromobility and an understanding of what that is. So in Arvada and at large, micromobility is typically consisting of devices that are electric, seated scooters, stand scooters, and bikes. And then they are typically rented for one-way trips using a mobile phone app, and that is where that shared component comes in. Users also usually have the flexibility to park near where they finish their trip, and they are permitted to ride in the public right-of-way and in Arvada, the trails as well. So just a little bit of our program timeline. Our program officially began in January of 2022. This was after some engagement by council in 2020 to understand the community's want for this program. Our first vendor was Bird, and the program was initially a 1-year pilot. The initial service area is in this map to the right and went from the city border up north to cover our G-line stations and then also to cover the Ralston Creek Trail. In October of 2022, staff came back to council to report on the progress of the program a few months in. At this time, phase 2 was approved with an expanded service area, which you can see in the map to the right here as well. The biggest expansion happened in this northern portion up to Pomona Drive to ensure that 80th Ave was covered, and then the western border remained Carr Street on that side. And then we had a small expansion up to West 64th over in that West Arvada area. In September of 2023, Bird exited the Arvada market due to some corporate restructuring, and Lime was entering our market, so we had no program lapse at this time. Also starting in 2023, per our municipal code, the program began running on a permitted basis annually and was considered an official city program, though publicly it is still labeled a pilot program. And that brings us to today, where we'll be reporting on our 3-year progress of the program and recommending some programmatic improvements. So we have 2 main documents that regulate our program, the first of which are our rules and regulations. These are a more detailed document that outline the intent of the program, terms of service, requirements, and responsibilities of our vendors. And this is a document that is able to be edited by staff and approved by the Director of Infrastructure. What this allows us to do is be really responsive to any compliance needs and to vendor issues that we might see or any other issues that might come up with the program. The municipal code is the ordinance that established our program, and this is the document that indicated it would become a city program unless terminated by council in January of 2023. So this document is only able to be edited and approved by y'all. Next, we have two primary program management tools. There are several other tools available to us, but these are the two that we use at the moment as preventative measures for program management. So the first of which is our parking compliance. This is majorly on the vendor side of things, and this is where Lime requires riders to take a photo of their device at the end of their ride, and they have an AI software that will check the device to see if it is blocking a sidewalk. This is not always 100% effective, but this is our first preventative measure, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how we address parking compliance issues later. We also have policy zones in Arvada. These are geographical boundaries where changes to the program, such as slower speeds or parking, are required and automatically applied to the device. So we have two of those in the city, the first of which is the Lawrence Elementary no parking zone, and the second of which is our Old Town slow zone. So in the Old Town slow zone, what happens is this covers our pedestrian mall, and this requires devices to slow to a 7-mile-per-hour speed, which is about an 8.5-mile jogging speed, if you can picture that, and they will automatically slow to that speed to try to decrease those conflicts between scooters and pedestrians in what is a really high pedestrian area. So where we're at now is our current vendor is still Lime. We do have the capacity and the ability to have a second vendor, but still only have one at this moment. The devices that are put out onto the streets by Lime are only e-scooters. However, you might notice e-bikes and more recently e-gliders in our market as well. That is because those devices are available in the Denver market, and a lot of folks will bring them between the two service areas. So while they're not being put out by Lime in Arvada, they do end up showing up here. Additionally, we have a vehicle deployment, which is the amount that they put out, cap of 200 devices. So that is the amount that the vendor is not supposed to exceed. Right now, we're seeing a typical deployment, or an on average, of 125 devices. Now, that is a little skewed by our winter months. We are seeing about less than 80 in response to the lack of demand in winter months, whereas in summer months, we are seeing it butt up against that 200 device cap. And then as far as enforcement requests, we do receive anywhere from 0 to 5 per month from community members. And we'll talk a little bit more later about how we address these, but I just wanted to set a baseline for how often folks are contacting us about the micromobility program.
Councilmember Davis.
Oh, yeah. Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, so we say that the bikes and the gliders are not part of our program. So does Lime track those and come and get them? Because there's quite a few of them in my neighborhood.
Yes, so they do not come to get them, as in they remove them from our market if they end up here. Usually their sort of policy is that because devices are able to be picked up by other riders, that is how they come in and out of the two different markets. Now we can request them to go pick them up if we wanted to, and if we didn't want those to be offered in Arvada, we could certainly request that.
And the reason I asked that question is because there was somebody who was riding one and it ran out of juice, and so they just abandoned it on the side of the road and started walking. So
Yeah.
that's what I think some of these, that's what happens. They run out of juice and people are like, all right, I'm just going to leave it here and continue on. So I just want to make sure that if these are not in our market, that somehow Lime is getting them off the street so they don't become a hazard.
Yes, yeah, when that happens, they do come and pick up the vehicle. They did also more recently hire someone to specifically work in the Arvada market. It was previously working on more of a gig economy type basis. And so now we have an individual who will go around and pick up devices that the batteries are dead or they are scattered places they shouldn't be, and they will take them back to the facilities to be charged.
I'd like to follow up on that. If a device is in a location and it's there for a period of time, for instance, a Denver e-bike user brought it to their buddy's house and then got a ride home and they've left it there, it doesn't belong here. Or even if it is one of our scooters, but it's left kind of in a random place, because I have seen these all over the city. How long will it be left there before somebody comes and attends to it?
That is a good question. I think I do keep an eye on them, and so I'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but we have a live map where we're able to see how long devices have been in a location, and so sometimes we catch them that way. I think typically the vendor is looking for someone else to come pick it up, but I think it would likely be a day or two, and we can certainly follow up on that and ask them what their actual time frame is.
Okay, and that would be great, particularly for devices that are not ours, because I imagine
Yeah.
you can see ours, but you probably can't see a map of Denver's.
We can see all devices that
Oh,
are
okay.
deployed. So even though we only offer e-scooters, if anything enters our service area, we can see it on our live map.
Okay, that's useful to know. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our public education and engagement with the community about the program. So our primary mode of information sharing about the program with the public is through our shared micromobility homepage housed on the city's website. So this contains information regarding the program's intent, operating rules, and parking rules, as well as providing folks with a link to input enforcement requests into Ask Arvada. Additionally, this is a new element that we have just created. We've created a Connecting Arvada Story Map. Story Map is a web-based tool for storytelling and data sharing, and we intend to have this available on the website as well. And it provides some really interesting mobility trend data from our bicycle and pedestrian counts on our trails, our micromobility program, and then our pavement conditions that we've collected with our data bike. And then lastly, the big thing that we do every year is we make sure that the vendor is showing face at our community events. So most recently, we worked with them to come to one of our Bike to Work Day stations, and they joined us at Memorial Park to hand out some food and helmets and chat with folks. And they will come to a couple of events per year to make sure that they're interfacing with the community and handing out some safety materials. We've also done 3 rounds of engagement for the program. As I mentioned, the first round of engagement was public meetings by council in 2020 to understand the community's interest in the shared micromobility program. This did lead to the initiation of the program, as well as informing many of the regulations that ended up being adopted by council. In 2022, we issued an online survey to the entire community. This was intended to understand the community's perceptions, concerns, and desired improvements for the program as it had been operating for a couple of months. So we heard from 576 community members at this point, and I do want to point out that this was only a few months into the program. This was summer of 2022 when the program had started in January of 2022. However, we heard 4 common themes from these respondents, the first of which was parking, which is always, I think, remains a community concern for the program. And we definitely heard that this was an issue for folks. They were concerned about parking affecting accessibility and being in the way. And one way that we have responded to that is with the AI software that was debuted in 2022, as well as reforming some of our compliance checks for the vendor. Second, we heard that safety was a concern, and this was primarily as it related to scooters interacting with pedestrians in shared use spaces with regards to speeding and not being courteous on the trails. And so while we can't always prevent individuals' behaviors, we do try to push out trail etiquette campaigns. Our Vibrant Communities and Neighborhoods Department has a tremendous trail etiquette campaign that we push out and will also help all users on trails, but includes our micromobility riders as well. This also informed the implementation of the Old Town Slow Zone to try to make sure that we're decreasing that in a high pedestrian area. Third, we heard that sidewalks are also too narrow for folks to be riding on with shared micromobility devices. As I'm sure you all know, many sidewalks in Arvada are 3 feet wide, which is certainly not always enough space for a scooter and a pedestrian to coexist. And so a lot of folks were responding that they would like to see more dedicated spaces to make it feel safer on street for folks to ride. And then fourth, we also heard that folks were interested in an expansion of the service area. So I know the first couple felt pretty negative, but I think there were a lot of people that were interested in the program serving more areas. So this did inform the later expansion in November, October of 2022, which expanded that up north service area. And lastly, we've had a 2024 Direct to Rider survey that was issued last summer. So this went out to the Lime app to users in the Arvada service area. And our goal with this was to understand how are riders using the program and what improvements they would suggest. So I'm going to go over some results of this since we have not published this data as of yet. So the first thing that we heard is that riders are using shared micromobility for a big variety of reasons. I think there is sometimes a misconception that shared micromobility is just for fun, but we are hearing that folks are using it not only for fun trips and social and entertainment, but to get to and from transit, to get to or from errands and shopping, to work or to other appointments. And so this was really exciting for us to see. We've also seen that when they are taking these trips, that for 34% of respondents, it did replace what would have been a shared or personal vehicle trip. So it's really exciting to hear that for these riders, and I'm sure many others, that these trips are taking car trips off of the road and doing what they intended to do and provide more transportation options. We also heard that riders feel much safer in bike lanes than car lanes. And so as you can see, we have sort of a flip between when they're feeling safe and unsafe versus a bike versus car lane. And so we have about, I believe, 88% or 82% that feel safe or very safe in a bike lane, and 77% that feel very unsafe or unsafe in a car lane. And so this can give us a little bit of insight as to why we might see some folks riding on sidewalks if there's not a dedicated facility on the street. And overall, we did hear from these respondents that micromobility is making their transportation journeys easier and faster, with about 93% of folks agreeing with that. And lastly, we learned that they have really key insights into what would make the program work better for them, and with the biggest suggestion being a larger operating area. So this reiterated something we heard in the 2022 survey, with folks again asking for potential expansion into West Arvada. As you saw in the previous map, we did do a northern expansion, but we just only did a tiny sliver in that West Arvada area. Folks are, again, looking for safe places to ride on in bike lanes, and so this can kind of help us to increase our compliance of folks not riding on sidewalks if we have safer places for them to ride on the streets. And then 3, 4, and 5 are all kind of about device expansion. So folks are looking to see more e-scooters and bikes in surrounding cities to have a more regional approach to the program. They're also looking just to see more e-scooters overall available, as well as that those scooters would be placed near transit stops.
Quick follow-up on that. In terms of the larger operating area, you mentioned that we didn't expand as much into West Arvada. I know a lot of our roads, particularly Indiana and whatnot, out on the west, don't necessarily, they're not conducive for these kinds of devices, and we wouldn't consider them safe. Is that why we didn't expand, just because of the infrastructure issues we have out there?
I believe so, and Kelly might be able to speak to that a little bit more since she was there when the expansion took place.
So we took a lot of data from where people's trips were ending, and we were seeing that there was a lot of trip ends toward the north part of Arvada, so kind of indicating that there was more of a demand to move north at that time. We also took into account that a lot of trips were ending at shopping areas. So a high use area was over here at Ralston Independence with Walmart and King Soopers. And so we really did try to take a look at the commercial centers that we could open up for people to be able to access.
Please, Councilmember, or Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
I just wanted to follow up on that. So thinking about, I understand some of the barriers with some of our north-south roads like Indiana and getting west from our like Old Town area to a place like Candelas, but I'm curious about micromobility that's on a smaller scale within an area like Candelas. Because that area is growing very fast and we're seeing more commercial areas there. So while micromobility may not work so great between Candelas and like Old Town, but within Candelas, would it be viable and feasible? So that'd be something I would be curious to look into.
Yeah, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but that actually gets into one of our recommendations, is that we do have the ability to pilot service areas that don't necessarily have to be attached to our existing service area. And so we could see how something like that operated over a year period, similar to how we did our initial service area here.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes, so I think that would be grand if we could expand to the northwest. My concern would be getting people across the railroad tracks. So, because we already have a group that wants to get across the railroad tracks. And That would just be my concern, is
Yeah.
if we decide to do something like that, we probably would have to do like they do with buggies at shopping carts, where they can't go across the railroad tracks because, God forbid, something happens.
Yeah.
But that's just a concern, because if we concede to one, we got to concede to them all.
Yeah, I second that. I like the idea of connecting Candelas and perhaps 5 parks, but I agree entirely. Indiana and that bridge isn't safe enough to cross, and we don't want anyone taking them through the pastures or across the tracks.
Definitely. So now we're going to talk a little bit about program performance and how we monitor that, and then what the data is telling us currently. So the primary way that we monitor our program is through data collection. We participate through using some of our program fees with DRCOG to get the Ride Report platform. And so this allows us to get data from devices, and it is compiled into one place where we're able to analyze it and track our information related to our program. So as I was mentioning earlier, we have a couple capabilities with this platform that are extremely helpful in managing it and in monitoring the overall growth and performance of the program. The first is general data analysis. This function allows us to sort by time periods, by vendor, by device, and will tell us information about how long trips are in terms of time and distance, how many trips are being taken, how many vehicles are available for folks, and other such information. We also are provided location-based data with the Ride Report platform in the form of heat maps. So we're able to see a heat map of routes and start and end trips. So this is what you're seeing here is a route heat map, and where those darker purples are where we're seeing higher amounts of ridership. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about where those routes are in a bit. And then lastly, as I was mentioning, we do have that live map of devices, and you can see in this corner, that is what shows up when we click on one of those circles. It will tell us what the actual device number or code is, what the battery is at for the device, if it's available for folks to pick up. And so that's something else we can monitor, is how long something has been unavailable, and ask the vendor to go pick it up, as well as the last update is the last time that the device was active. So that'll also help us to understand if someone comes to us and says, hey, this device has been here for 2 days, we can go and look at the device, pinpoint it on the map, and understand how long it's actually been there, and then talk with the vendor about how to address the issue. So on that note
quickly,
as well.
Councilmember
Sorry.
Davis.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, do we have any data on anything that has been vandalized?
I don't think so. We don't collect that data. Lime might, but they have not reported the data to us of what devices may have been vandalized.
Councilmember Rupert.
So the placement map, will it show when devices are dumped in bushes? I assume the answer there would be probably yes. It'll show the location, maybe?
It shows the location, but unfortunately, unless we're being hypervigilant on a staff side and zooming in on all of our devices, we're not always able to see if something is in a location it's not supposed to be in. However, that is where the Ask Arvada platform comes in, and then each device also has a number and QR code for folks to report any parking issues.
Sort of draws me to the vandalism question, because I've seen them dumped in the creek,
Yep,
in
me
Ralston
too.
Creek, and I'm not sure that it would show up on your placement map if it's underwater.
Yes, it would probably show up in Ralston Creek, in which case I would definitely alert the vendor of that immediately. Typically ones like that, because they are pretty urgent and pretty out there, we hear about those very quickly. People will contact us by email or phone or through the platform, and we get those taken care of.
Are there stickers on the devices to let them know to call somebody in the city?
So there is not anything on the devices themselves to call us. It would direct them to Lime themselves. Something that has been floated is potentially that is a educational piece that we're missing at the moment, is that making sure folks have a phone number, whether that's mine or someone else's, to call, or directing them straight to the Ask Arvada platform to ensure that we're hearing about any compliance issues.
Councilmember Marriott.
Are we using any city staff time or resources to fetch devices out of places they're not supposed to be?
We are not. So we ask the vendor to grab any devices that we hear about. I just had one recently where it was a similar kind of near Relston Creek. It seemed kind of tricky, but they were able to get it no problem. Our rules and regulations require that they pick it up within 4 hours from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays, and then 12 hours any other time. And we've had no issues with them meeting that time frame.
Okay, so if we have a citizen who says, hey, there's 2 scooters in the creek and I'm afraid they're polluting the water, the vendor still has to deal with it. We don't send parks workers out or wastewater workers, anybody
Nope.
out to deal with it? Okay.
No, and if we did, we would bill them for that time. That's how we have funding set up that we would draw from their holding account. So it would not be on our dime at all. And on that note, as I mentioned, we do use the Ask Arvada platform a lot for our compliance issues with the Micromobility program. It is still a community concern. We still see devices where they're not supposed to be, but we are working to ensure we have prompt responses and good customer service, And one way we do this is by having the scooter-specific category in Ask Arvada, which was added last year. And this has been really helpful for us to be able to track when we're receiving these requests and how quickly that they are resolved.
And just to remind us from earlier in the presentation, you said it's 0 to 5 complaints a week or a month?
A month.
Okay.
And so just to be clear, those are the ones that we are receiving as city staff. Lime will deal with any that they receive directly, and they don't report those to us, but from our platforms, either email, Ask Arvada, or phone calls, we're receiving anywhere from 0 to 5.
Is it possible to get those numbers from Lime? I would be very curious,
Yeah.
because what I don't want to have happen is, the QR code takes you to Lime, not to us, and then resolve things, but then not let us know about it.
Yes, definitely. I think we could ask them to do that, and we can make sure that we continue to track that. We have a tracker where we put all of our requests, so we can just make sure we add them to that as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so how we address parking issues when they come to us is that we will always put it in Ask Arvada if we didn't receive it through that platform, just to make sure that we're tracking it and being held accountable there. We also will immediately contact the vendor and record the time that they were contacted. The vendor will then let us know when the issue has been resolved, and we will ensure that they met that time requirement per the rules and regulations. As I mentioned, so far we have not had any issues with them exceeding that time requirement. And then if necessary, we do typically follow up with the community member to let them know. Sometimes it's just a voicemail because they want to have it solved, and we'll just let them know that the vehicle has been picked up. And then we also monitor our program performance through our relationship with the region. So we participate in regional collaboration through DRCOG's Mobility Working Group. We meet about once a month, and this is a really good opportunity for us to share information and understand where we're stacking up in the region, where there might be gaps, and what program improvements others are doing that we could apply to our program in Arvada.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes, could you just share with the audience and people watching what DRCOG is?
Yes, apologies. Yeah, so DRCOG is our Denver Regional Council of Governments, and they are a regional entity that covers many issues, including transportation, and so they oversee a group that works on micromobility in the region, which includes, I believe at this point, Denver, Aurora, Wheat Ridge, Lakewood, and a few others that all meet every month. So now we'll talk a little bit about what the data from Ride Report is telling us. So we are seeing that riders are using shared micromobility more than ever. What this graph is showing you is 2 20-month periods of the program from January 2022 to September 2023, and then where Lime picked up in that September of 2023 to May 2025.
Is that is very sharp spike in usage. Is that simply because more people have accounts with Lime and it's kind of the dominant purveyor in this area? Or is it because Bird didn't have as much sort of offering?
I think it is a lot to do with the amount of devices that were deployed. I think also the name recognition of the program as well. I think as the program itself went on longer, folks understood that they were available in Arvada and used them more frequently. But we think the biggest driver of this growth has been the reliability of vehicles available to riders. We went from not that many to around 125 to 150 per day. So I think that understanding that you would have available vehicle for you has really driven in ridership.
Gotcha. And I'm sure most people have kind of gathered this, but I just want to call it out. These dips, I'm guessing those are seasonal. That's the weather.
Yes, I was just about to point that out. So yeah, anything that you see that's really high is those summer months. Typically, it's actually, because it gets so hot here, we're actually seeing our kind of high ridership summer months are May, June, July area. And then definitely those dips are around January and February. So that is, but as you can see, even those are higher than any of our original 20-month first period of the program's ridership. And the program is continuing to grow. So we actually just recently had our highest month of ridership in May, which is really exciting. So we're still seeing those numbers grow as we get into our summer months of ridership.
And my guess is these are total rides, not user unique riders.
These are rides per, so they measure trips. So if an individual took 2 trips in a day, that would be reflected in this total as well.
Okay, so this is total, because the reason why I mentioned that is the headline is riders are using shared. That could mislead somebody to think that these are total rider numbers, like that we had over
Fair enough.
9,000 riders.
Yes.
Yeah, so just making sure that's clear.
Yes, it is trips per month. Yes. Can do. That is reflected, I will say, in our report as well. So it does say monthly trips on that, so I'll make sure that's reflected. Just to put a total on that number, we have seen 130,368 total micromobility trips from that January 2022 to the end of May 2025. And between those two 20-month periods, that was about a 659% increase in trips, which, as I'm sure you can see, that pretty steep increase. We've also seen that riders are using micromobility for trips shorter than a mile. Our average trip distance is 0.94 miles, with that amounting to about 9 minutes on average on the device. But I did want to also point out that over half of our trips are also less than 5 minutes. So we really are seeing folks use these for short trips. As mentioned, this is our heat map from previously. Those darker purple areas are where we're seeing higher trips. And just to point this out, this is also not a perfect measurement. This is for individual segments. So while you can't use this to estimate in total how many riders or trips are taking place on this segment, it is a really good tool to look at density of trips. And so we found that folks are using West 57th, Grandview, Old Wadsworth, Ralston Road, and West 52nd most often. But as you can see, the routes are pretty spread throughout our service area, only getting into those lighter, lower density trips as we reach the edges of our boundaries and in some of the neighborhoods as well. We are also able to see our trip starts and ends. This is the same type of heat map where the darker purple is where there's higher density, with our trip starts on the top of the page and the trip ends on the bottom. And what we learned by looking at this is that riders are starting and ending trips in close proximity to services. So grocery stores, restaurants, as well as transportation opportunities, and in areas with a diversity of housing options. So most of the dark purple areas that you are seeing there are concentrated along commercial areas. And I just wanted to point out 2 for you today. The first being, as Kelly mentioned, at 58th and Independence. We're seeing a lot of folks, the arrows are gone, apologies. But this is an area where we're seeing really high ridership and a lot of trip starts and trip ends, with a lot of folks ending their trips along the King Soopers and at the Walmart. And then we are also seeing a lot of trip starts and trip ends in this area at West 51st and Kipling Parkway, just south of our Arvada Ridge station. So we are seeing a lot of folks end their trips at the apartment buildings to the right, as well as the Target and then various businesses throughout that marketplace. We're also seeing a lot of folks use this corridor to reach the Arvada Ridge station. On that note, something that was an initial goal of this program was to help riders reach transit. However, in that first 20-month phase of the program, the data wasn't strong on the connection to transit. This is also a product of that lower ridership, but as you can see, we were seeing a lot less riders use micromobility to reach transit. So each of these numbers is an end trip at this station. And so, for instance, at Arvada Gold Strike, we saw 8 end trips over a 20-month period. We saw some more at Old Town, but that can also be attributed to some of the retail services in that area. And then we saw just over 20 at the Arvada Ridge station. However, something that was really exciting to see is that as ridership overall grew, we also saw ridership and trip ends grow at our transit station. So at the Arvada Gold Strike station, over a 20-month period, we saw over 1,500 trips end there. That's about 100 trips a month. We saw over 2.7 thousand trips end at Old Town. Again, some of these can be contributed to folks coming to Old Town to visit, but a lot of people are using it to reach or come from the G Line station. And then at the Arvada Ridge station, we saw, again, over 1,000 trips end there, which is about 83 trips per month at that station, which was just really exciting to see that alongside the overall growth, we are seeing people use it more and more to reach transit.
Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
I'm just curious to follow up on that. Has RTD been able to show any, increase in our use of our transit as in relation to our increase in use of micromobility?
We have not made that correlation yet, but I think that would be something really interesting to ask of them, is look at ridership data for these same periods and understand if we're seeing any sort of partnership between ridership numbers and micromobility numbers. We can certainly do that. Okay, great. So now we're going to talk a little bit about recommendations we have for the continuance of the program based on where we're seeing the program performance land and the ridership grow. So I just want to start with 2 baseline recommendations, and these are essentially recommendations that would continue the program as it operates now with a few operational tweaks to make it work a little bit easier. So the first would be to extend the program. As I mentioned earlier, pilot is still included publicly on this program, despite it being a city program. So we're just recommending that we remove pilot from the program's regulating documents and website, and it would continue to operate on that annually permitted basis with up to 2 vendors. It would still obviously be an at-will program with subject to any changes to its rules and regulations and municipal code. Our second baseline recommendation would be to continue and expand our educational efforts in partnership with our vendors, and we would like to make sure that this focuses on rules of the road, increasing that connection between micromobility and transit, and ensuring that we have really clear, consistent community information sharing. And so, as I mentioned earlier with the story map, we'd like to make sure that we are providing the community with data on our program and understanding how it's operating. So now we have 2 recommendations for further development, and these recommendations are those that we are not currently doing. So they are a bit more of established infrastructure that we feel is appropriate given the potential for the program to become not a pilot any longer, as well as the increase in overall ridership and use of the program. So the first of which would be to establish, and we would look to work with the vendor, which is currently Lime, to establish dedicated parking locations where rider density specifically encourages doing so. So an example of a parking location for micromobility is to the right here. They're often called parking corrals, and they are typically low price options for users to put their devices in. Probably the first location we would explore would be Old Town, and understanding where we have the rider density to put parking corrals as well as the space in Old Town. And then a second step could be exploring a mandatory parking zone in that area as well.
Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
I think that was going to get to my question. So if they did put a parking place location in Old Town, then would parking be restricted just to that location so that that's the only place people could leave their vehicles? Is that correct?
That is a potential of the program for sure, because we have the ability to enact pilot policy zones. That is one way that if we did install an adequate number of parking corrals that we felt we were not burdening riders with trying to have to walk around to find one, we could certainly require that they park in those parking corrals, and the rest of the Old Town pedestrian mall is a dismount zone.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Rupert.
So for these designated parking corrals in other jurisdictions, who pays for the striping and barriers, that sort of thing?
So in Denver, Lime has installed several on their own dime, and they have expressed to us that they would be willing to work with us to do so as well. We do have some funds available from program fees that are intended to be reinvested in the program if we do want to do anything beyond what Lime would be willing to install.
And that leads me to the next question, that is, what are the program fees? How much is accumulated? And are we covering our actual costs associated with it?
Yes, so the cost for the program is really low. Essentially, all we are paying into is that DRCOG partnership to have access to Ride Report at this point. We are charging 10 cents per ride at this point. So during the summer months, we're averaging about $1,500 to $1,700 in program fees. We also require them to pay a fee at the beginning of each permit year. So overall, I believe the program has accumulated, I think it's just over $15,000 that's available for reinvestment into the program. And some of that has been spent on some parking infrastructure that was piloted, but a lot of it remains available.
Okay, and presumably you're spending some time doing this, so we have staff time engaged in this.
Absolutely.
This program as
Yeah.
well. I'm also interested in safety of these vehicles. Do we have any records of their being involved in accidents, either with pedestrians or other vehicles?
So I believe those records would come from PD, and they have not given us any internal records of that occurring. Now, Lime might have more information on potentially that happening, but as far as I know, we don't have any reported incidents of there being accidents involving a Lime scooter in Arvada.
I think probably verifying that one way or the other would be a very important
Can do.
data point for us to consider when we want to encourage or not this kind of program. Thanks.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes, thank you. And following on to Councilmember Rupert's question, one of my questions, you can see I actually read this. We did a lot of outreach and education to the micromobility users, but have we done any outreach and education for vehicle operators? Because I have seen some near misses, and I think what we have done is we've concentrated on the riders, but we've forgotten about the people who are in their vehicles doing this. Like they're not supposed to, right, officers? They're not supposed to be doing this. We still see it. Or we see somebody who's, looking for something and they start veering off into the bike lane or whatever. So I think that just doing some of that education either via the Arvada report, Channel 8, there's some really good, all animated safety stuff that's already out there. If we could do something like that, that would be great. Hi, Kelly.
Hello. I will just hop in here and let you know we have a heads up campaign that we run typically twice a year, and we try to aim for around daylight savings changes. And that is geared towards bike, pedestrian, and vehicle. We've talked about revamping that, and I think adding in micromobility would be a great addition to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. I think, let's see. So yeah, building on kind of y'all's comments as well as continuing this recommendation, I do want to emphasize that we would only establish or think about parking locations where that rider density would encourage doing so. So as I mentioned with the previous areas, the commercial areas, there might be opportunities to establish mobility hubs where we wouldn't necessarily require that riders park in those locations, but they would be really useful in pieces of infrastructure to encourage us to have less compliance issues with vehicles parked in incorrect locations. We also would want to make sure that we are using our micromobility data to prioritize segments for on-road mobility infrastructure improvements. So just ensuring moving forward that we're always taking that data into consideration and understanding where we know that there are lots of micromobility riders. And lastly, our last recommendation is to expand. So this gets a little bit to our conversation earlier, is that we would like to see the use of trip data to propose and implement incremental service area expansions based on demand. So this would be in direct conversation with the community as well. Where do they think it would be an actual service for them and where it would make sense? And as I mentioned, an initiative that would likely feed into this would be piloting those expanded service areas. And they would not necessarily need to be attached to our existing service area, but we would develop metrics to understand what it meant to be a successful service area. We would also like to work with our regional partners more to learn from them and understand how we could potentially expand that interjurisdictional connectivity and mobility choices. So for instance, in this picture to the right here, you can see that our service area, aka the borders of Arvada here, do cut off riders at the moment from the last station on the G line. And so how can we have conversations in the future to talk about expanding service area, even if it's just in that one location, to ensure that we're not keeping riders from being able to use those devices to go to and from that station.
Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
Thank you. I have not heard anything about adding bikes and gliders. Can you talk about that, please?
Yes, so that is part of the expansion that I was going to talk about as well, is that I think as we can pilot service areas, we can also work with the vendor to pilot different device types. So while we don't offer the e-bikes and e-gliders at the moment, there has been interest expressed from the vendor to offer those e-bikes in Arvada. I think previously that was off the table a little bit, which I think had a lot to do with there not being enough ridership in the city. And ridership growth has definitely encouraged more devices to be available for folks. Now that does always change how we might approach parking compliance, right? A bigger device might have more impact. But we are at the moment dealing with some bikes being parked incorrectly, and again, we're responding very quickly to those. Cool. Okay, so I think the last thing I had was just talking about learning from those around us. So you might have heard that Denver is looking to implement in 2026 sidewalk detection technology. And so one thing we will be looking to do in the future is keeping an eye on that and working with them directly to understand how that program operates and how that might apply in Arvada, and if that's something that we would like to adopt. And this is something that the vendors are aware that we would be discussing and understanding if it would work for us.
Apologies. Councilmember Davis.
Yes, thank you. So I'm glad that you're going to add bicycles, because my husband has said I'm not allowed to ride a scooter. So that would be super to get the bikes. And then I had a question, wayfinding. Are we working with parks? No. Vibrant communities and neighborhoods for signage for wayfinding? Because there are areas where the concrete path ends and you don't know where to go to the other side. That would be very helpful. And then just, I know that using Waze or sometimes maps will tell me like Allendale is under construction, so I should probably not ride my e-bike back there. So are we participating in anything like that?
Yeah, I'll speak to the wayfinding. No, you're fine. So that is something we had discussed previously, and it is a recommendation in our bicycle master plan. I believe we had been waiting. Jefferson County was looking to implement some sort of wayfinding, and we wanted to make sure that whatever we did was cohesive with their wayfinding signage as well. It's something that we've talked about potentially using an on-call to kind of dive into a little bit more research on that. And then in addition to your other question, while we haven't worked with Waze at this point, our data bike is equipped with a 360 camera. So while we might not have up-to-date information, we are going to be riding that around and collecting visuals so that we can upload our trail network and some of those harder to reach spaces to our Google Street View, so individuals can plan their routes a little bit easier.
And that was all I had. Thank you so much for having me, and I would be happy to answer any additional questions you might have.
Councilmember Marriott.
So no, no questions, but I do want to answer the two questions or the questions you asked. So I'd certainly be fine with removing the word pilot from the program. You know, when we first started this, we were not sure whether it would be tolerated here in Arvada, whether it would be effective. And it was probably right to pilot it because we could have gone back to no program at all. But you know, it's been long enough. There's no chance we're going back to none. I mean, I think that would be unreasonable to say, well, we've had enough, we're done with it, we're going to get rid of it. I think it's shown that it has some effectiveness. So fine with that. The second one is, I would recommend that we as the city or the regulatory agency just remove any service area restrictions that we have and let the vendors, the market decide where these are deployed and where they go. I suspect that even if they were allowed to, that the vendors may not choose to place devices in far-flung locations, places where they have little to no chance of economic success. And I think the use and the market would drive this very, very elegantly, and the vendors could decide where best for they go. By the way, it's also good for us because you know, if they expand their area into other places, presumably there'd be more people taking rides, which one, we would collect a little bit more money. That's not really the big deal, but the big deal is it's a bunch of car trips that are avoided. And so we win from that. And I don't see any logic whatsoever in us artificially restricting where these might go when a market can do that more easily than we can. I know we think we're super wise up here and we know what's best for everybody, but I guarantee you we don't, and that we should do that. The other thing then that I would do is I would immediately then start talking to the vendors about how do you equitably do the allow the use of these devices across jurisdictions. So I think, you know, someone who comes from Denver, you know, are they charged where they pick the device up or where they leave the device? Is there some revenue sharing model? I don't know what all the options might be. But I would suggest that we as a group, you know, engage in those types of talks to come up with plans for that. Because I think that artificially restricting these to the city limits of Arvada when we've got shopping areas immediately adjacent to us on all sides makes no sense. And we would again, stand to benefit in every way that we benefit from the use inside of Arvada. We would benefit equally if they were used across jurisdictions. So those are my answers to your questions and recommendations.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for this report, and thank you for the work your team has done. This is really exciting. It's great to see this huge increase in use over a short amount of time. And to see the impact it's having on reducing vehicle traffic, which we want to continue to use. And I'd be curious to again see more data on that, and also, as I mentioned earlier, if that helps increase the use of our transit system as well. I will make a comment tonight, and that I agree with Mr. Marriott, so everyone get that on the record. And I think that we should remove pilot, and I think we should let this expand to the whole city and let the vendor determine that. So I think that is the right way to go, and I think this program has really shown itself to, it has, you know, a strong public interest in our community to use, and we want to continue to encourage that. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes, thank you. This has been great, and I too am excited about taking out pilot and expanding our area, because I do know that there are folks in Westwoods that would like to take the scooters and go to businesses to the east, and they're very excited about that. So if we do take that off, that would excite those folks out there. Maybe we have a little parking space out at the golf course or something like that. Definitely. So that would be something we can think outside of the box. But thank you for this, and I can't wait to use one of the bikes. I'll try a scooter, but
The gliders are nice. They're like sit-down scooters.
oh, okay.
Mini motorcycle.
Well, see, I can do that. I don't think my husband have a problem with that.
Councilmember Rupert.
I agree that we ought to remove the term pilot from the program. I think that ship sailed. Also, removing the barriers across the city. I'm interested, you made reference to having speed governors on the devices where they are in a couple of corridors near Old Town or in Old Town. I'm wondering if there is opportunity or advantage to using the same technology elsewhere, like along Ralston Creek, where there's a fair amount of traffic with people and pets and other vehicles, so that we can avoid whatever accidents might be occurring that we're not tracking. I think that was it for my comments. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would also add that we can use those policy zones if we want to make sure that we're not having riders in unsafe locations. So as you mentioned earlier, the railroad crossings, we can use those as a no-ride area if we wanted to really try to make sure that if we're opening up the service area, but we still want to keep folks safe, we can use those for that as well.
Thank you. Are you? Okay, thank you. So agreed, remove pilots, appreciate that. And I'm also completely for opening this up to the city, but my sense, if the council agrees, is I tend to agree that we need the no-ride areas. For instance, it only takes, unfortunately, one person to make sort of a bad decision, and I just have a vision of somebody trying to take one of these under that bridge on Indiana and the railroad tracks, and that at some point, that scenario does not end well. And even in a safe situation, backing up traffic, we've already got enough traffic issues out there. We don't need to compound those. But no, I agree. I like opening this up. And there's alternate routes people can take. 88th East, go down a different route would be just fine. So I agree with the safety areas.
Okay. Thank you. No one has any other comments?
I see no additional lights.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Great job. All right. I will close that workshop and open our next one on the Transportation System Plan Update. Welcome.
The document here.
Okay, perfect.
Just in case you want to reference it. And here's the table of contents.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. We're very excited to bring to you tonight a presentation on the Transportation System Plan and where we're at with that. Before we get started, I just wanted to introduce our panel of speakers tonight. I'm Kelly Van Breggen, Transportation Planning Manager with the Infrastructure Department. We have Thomas Shaw, one of our traffic engineers, also with infrastructure. And then we have our Kimley Horn team, so our project manager, Mike Griffith, and our deputy project manager, Curtis Rowe. I would also like to take a moment to extend our gratitude from our project management team to everybody that has been involved in this process. So it's not just us. It has been quite an effort. First, I'd like to thank you, Council, for your support over the last 2 years through this process. It's been integral in helping us navigate some of these transportation issues that we've been seeing. I'd also like to thank our external and our internal partners that have provided the technical guidance throughout this process. And then lastly, I'd like to also thank our Transportation Advisory Committee. We have an excellent showing here tonight. They're really the impetus behind why this project got started. Incredibly passionate about transportation, as well as providing a lot of support throughout the whole process, being a great touch point throughout everything that we've done and providing feedback throughout. So just wanted to take a moment to recognize their efforts in this. So on tonight's agenda, we're going to go through our project overview, where we started and how we got to where we are today. We'll pass it off to Tom about going over our major TSP findings, and then finally our Kimley Horn team will walk us through the draft final document. So leading into our project overview, you've seen this slide in the past. We try to keep this as kind of a touch point for every presentation that we're giving. So Really, this project started off by identifying existing and anticipated future transportation deficiencies. This really led into what we ended up going out to the community for our public engagement element. It helps set priorities for the future of our transportation system. And then from there, we developed a potential project list, or if you remember from a couple workshops ago, our unconstrained project list, where we had over 80 different projects that were developed to address deficiencies for all transportation modes. So we not only looked at vehicular transportation, but bicycle and pedestrian access, as well as access to transit. From there, we evaluated that unconstrained project list against quantitative and qualitative measures so that we could start sorting out where those projects fit in a priority. And from there, we took those high to mid-high priority projects and started matching those with potential local, state, or federal funding sources. I do want to note here that this plan is a 20-year plan, and we recognize that administrations, especially at the state and federal level, change. And so with matching those potential funding sources, we did leave flexibility within that project list so that we can be adaptive to new transportation legislation that is pushed forward at different levels of government. And then lastly, throughout this whole process, what we really wanted to do is build interest and excitement among the public about transportation investments. So this is an overview of our project schedule. Again, we've been working through this process for nearly 2 years, and we are nearing the end. So as you'll see, we noted where we are at in this process. We do have a few wrap-up items that we will be completing, and I'll get into that on the next slide. So our next steps is we're looking to close out the draft documentation for the TSP here coming up in August. So we're going to take any additional feedback we receive from council, as well as any of the working groups that we've been engaging throughout the process, and make sure that all of those comments have been addressed. We're also starting conversations with our internal team to talk about TSP implementation. So this isn't a plan that's just going to sit on the shelf and collect dust. We're really going to utilize it. And I can share with you that we've already started to utilize the TSP. So as grant opportunities have popped up, we're really trying to match those current grant opportunities with projects that are in the high to mid-high priority project listing of the TSP. We also benefit from, when submitting those applications to the grantors, that we can say that it is an identified high priority project. It's gone through public comment, and people really feel a desire to get this accomplished, which I think strengthens our applications. And then finally, we're looking at an integration of the TSP with the upcoming work of the comprehensive plan. So looking at kicking that off next year, but really a lot of the transportation work, we've laid a really great foundation that we believe we can kind of wrap up into the comprehensive plan and make that seamless between the two documents. We are not only looking at the comprehensive plan, but we've already started integrating the TSP in our comprehensive safety action plan that we're working on with Adams County. So some of the safety data that we've collected through this process, as well as the public engagement where people saw safety obstacles or challenges, have been incorporated within that document as well. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Thomas to talk about the major TSP findings.
Thank you, Kelly. So as we were working through the TSP with our team and with all the internal and external stakeholders, initially a lot of time had been invested in trying to understand and evaluate and determine what are all of our network gaps and where can we see most of the opportunities for improved efficiency, not only for vehicular traffic, but also for all modes of transportation. Initially, we started by looking at existing conditions and identifying gaps from multiple perspectives, whether it be severe crash rate, understanding where we might have activity centers that have limited connectivity with sidewalk to and from them, pavement and bridge conditions that are struggling, network gaps, as well as a variety of other traffic count collection means, including whether it was traditional traffic count collection, INREX data, which is another means of describing how we might be able to benefit from using data that is available from cell phones and understanding on a more city-wide scale how travel is moving through the city. Again, in conjunction with a handful of other metrics. As we identify these gaps and start to look through everything, we developed the unconstrained project list, which initially was started at 87 total projects, with the majority being in active transportation projects, whether it being bike trails, sidewalks, things of that nature. The next biggest category falling to improve vehicular travels, into reducing congestion, improving safety at intersections, as well as several that also fell into the transit category. Between defining this list, the next step is really trying to tie back to the initial vision and goals of the project, looking back to not only why we're looking at these from certain perspectives of improving gaps, but then also tying back to our 8 objectives from ease of traffic for all modes, safety for all, improved intersection operations, amongst a variety of other objectives with, 8 goals and 27 objectives. From here, we start to really provide and quantitatively understand from these performance metrics, how do we start to prioritize, how do we start to grade each project in comparison to one another. Above, and I believe we've all seen this before, is a breakdown of, from the 8 goals, the weighting scale that had been applied to then score and rank the projects in relation to one another. From this, we're able to develop a high priority project list. In this attachment, we have close to the top 30 projects that have been ranked and determined to be some of the higher priorities. This includes some of the unit costs that have been estimated at a planning level, as well as some of the next implementation steps that we think would be most advantageous for the city to take, as well as what the most likely city role would be in conjunction with collaborating with external agencies.
Councilmember Davis.
I thank you for this. And you are on my Christmas card list.
Okay.
Could you back up one? Okay, so I'm concerned about the enhanced prioritized services to disadvantaged communities. What are we considering to be in Arvada our disadvantaged communities, and then why have we weighted them so low?
Mike, could I ask you to speak to that?
Sure. Thank you for the question and the opportunity to clarify. So there was a lot of discussion around the weighting of each goal in the category. One idea was that they would be equal. Other ideas, like we have safety as our top priority, that was coming directly from feedback from the project team. The enhance and prioritize services to disadvantaged communities, there's a whole chapter in the document that looks at that under the framework and evaluation criteria on page 36. So we can kind of look at that in more depth. But basically, we're looking at using GIS data. We can figure out demographics and kind of where our marginalized communities are, and make sure that we are weighting the prioritization of services in those communities to and from. The percentage of 5%, I can see that in context that looks low, and I appreciate the concern in bringing that to our attention. I think the narrow focus of that category may be being mixed up between the significance of it. So it's its own category by itself, next to a category like safety that affects the entire city. So I think I hear you, and I think it's something that we should, before we finalize, make sure that this is in the right place and we're doing this in the right way. But I also want to call attention to the fact that it is its own category, and it did make 1 out of 8. And we can provide some additional detail around how that's documented in the TSP and make sure that we're satisfying the concerns there. Does that sound okay? Of course. Go ahead, Thomas.
I think that's actually, unless there are any other questions on the high priority project list.
Actually, I have a quick follow-up. In terms of the disadvantaged communities, you mentioned demographics. Are we looking, can you tell me a little bit more about the demographics? Are we looking at race, economics, isolation, age, et cetera?
Yeah, within the travel demand refinement memo, in a conjunction with a handful of data points, whether it was for jobs, population, amongst a lot of those various areas. It kind of breaks down in much more detail how, kind of when the heat map scales, the city was able to define and like apply a score to each one of those. But while I might not be able to speak as well as I would like to that, it's really clear in the refinement memo.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And with that, I'll pass it off to Mike.
And I don't want to just gloss over that. I think it is a really important question. And so we have our draft document here, so I'm going to turn to it real quick and we'll talk about it a little bit if that's okay with council. All right, cool. So like I said, page 36 has that information. And essentially what we're doing is we're looking at the proximity for the particular demographics that we're looking into and how the transportation network is being improved in that area. And that's how the scores are being calculated. So we can look at it from a distance perspective, we can look at it from a quantity perspective. And if we go directly to the page 35, underneath the objectives, I don't know if you guys can see this, but it was in the handout. Underneath goals, there's the enhanced services for disadvantaged communities, and then over to the right on objectives, it's add transportation choices to disadvantaged communities. We can measure the number of transportation choices that are being added within those geographic areas. It's invest in areas with high propensity for active transportation or transit. So that means that we can invest in areas that are near transportation opportunities. So like access to the G line or bus lines. We can improve one of the recommendations is to improve service lines and headways. And then we can make investments that support pre-planned growth areas. So that's getting back to some of the city's other planning initiatives. And those all tie back to serving disadvantaged communities. When we get to the numbers for those is where it gets a little bit more technical, and we can kind of dive into that maybe once we finish the overview. But I want to make sure we're providing clarity around this particular topic. We've talked about it a lot internally, but as it is one of 8, we've spent a lot of time on all of those categories. And I can tell you, in working with our Transportation Advisory Committee and the group, this was elevated as a specific category for an overall goal. So when we looked at these specific percentages for each one of those, there was a robust discussion between the project team and our recommendations with the project leadership team at the city, and then with our stakeholder advisory group. So it went through a lot of filters, but that doesn't mean it can't be tweaked if there's still concern there.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that explanation. I was looking at that. I am on page 35.
Okay.
And I did see this, and it says, make investments that support pre-planned growth areas.
Right.
So I would assume that maybe we are thinking of the Northwest as maybe a disadvantaged area because it doesn't have any transportation diversity. Everybody has to use a car to get out there, or if they want to use a bicycle, they can. So I'm looking at that in terms of diversity and being disadvantaged. But in terms of growth, like in District 2, I'm just speaking for my ghost members here, but District 2 is pretty much at build out. So I just want to make sure that we are investing in areas for high propensity for active transportation, because there are folks there who may be using the bus and the G line to get to work. They don't work in Arvada, they work elsewhere. So I just want to make sure that we keep our minds a little open about that. I want to make sure that we don't put them in an inequitable position. I don't want them to think that that's what we're doing.
Correct. And further information on this is actually on page 51. So that's where we have some of the demographic mapping. I know you can't see that from here, but the demographic mapping that does show a fair amount of these areas that were identified on the east side of the city. So I think that's probably what you're speaking to, Councilmember Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to follow up, I agree entirely with what Councilmember Davis is saying. The reason why I asked my question is particularly in light of today's political climate. You say the word disadvantaged communities, that's going to mean 100 different things to 100 different people, and it's going to piss 20 of them off. And so what I would like is just how are we defining it in terms of this context?
Right. The information is detailed in the report, but we can look at that.
For the public who is watching.
Yes, yeah, no, fair enough. We define it in a number of different ways. We look at socioeconomic data. It comes from a GIS map set, and we're able to say there's certain incomes, there's certain demographics that live throughout the city, and they're concentrated in areas of the city, usually urban areas, more on the east side of Arvada in particular. And those areas would benefit the most from transportation investments. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Perfect.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't forget our friends up in the Northwest who say
Correct.
that they would love to have some sort of public transit to get to the G line.
Right.
But if without it, I may as well just transverse across the northern side of the city and then drive into wherever I'm going. So I
Sure.
think, or even going north, they're just going to go north. So I just don't want to forget our friends in the Northwest.
Yeah, and I'll add some information to that. When we started this project, which it's hard to believe was 24 months ago, one of the pieces of information we got from Don Wick, who's now the city manager, was the efficiency problem, is what he called it. And the efficiency problem of moving east to west and north to south in Arvada has got to be solved. And he spoke at length, Councilmember Davis, about that and saying if we can't connect folks to transportation, major regional transportation like the G line that are on the west side of the city, then the transportation plan is going to be flawed from the get-go. So you'll notice that in the top 10 projects, there are quite a few that are those primary corridors that move east-west and north-south that need to be addressed from a capacity standpoint. All right. Sure, of course, happy to provide that clarity. I will jump back into the presentation now. So we will take a tour of the document, which we kind of did for fun anyway. I'm glad we did that. So for those following at home, the table of contents page basically has all of the materials that we're going to be looking at. And we are still in draft, but this is final draft. We're going to take comments that we received today, comments that we've collected from our final round of comment collection from the stakeholder committees, and then also a final round of meetings with the Public Works Managers team, and compile all of that into a finalized document in August, as Kelly mentioned. So the document tour will be split up between Curtis and I. I'll take over the first portion of it. We're going to talk about the different chapters a little bit, and then we'll go through each chapter kind of one by one. So we'll have a chance to kind of dive back in a little bit. So with the next slide, or I have the slides. I don't know who I'm speaking to there. Thank you. For the next slide, these are the chapters that are represented in the document and the major content in each chapter. We start with the executive summary. The executive summary bleeds into an introduction that's kind of the overview of the entire project, some of the information you've heard from Thomas as he went through our findings. Then we have public engagement, where we look at all the different outreach efforts that we've done over the last 2 years and how that information translated into measurable outcomes for the project. Then we move into a section that's really called the framework section, but it includes the goals, objectives, and evaluation criteria. That really is the meat of the overall document. That's where the engine is being constructed that will allow us to produce the recommendations in the later parts of the document. That moves into the investment and development and prioritization. So that really puts together the plan moving forward. So that's how to prioritize projects, what they're going to cost, what type of funding resources are going to be available. And then that informs the capital improvement plan. So one of the things that we talked about at length in our last meeting in May were the different funding buckets. So we'll go through that in brief in the presentation, but it's detailed in the document. We talked about that with City Council in regard to what the buckets entail. One thing I wanted to add a little bit of detail to is that the TSP is primarily looking at seed funding these recommended projects. Arvada, like most municipalities, is unable to fund all of its infrastructure projects. The construction is just too expensive. We don't exist in a vacuum, so we rely on our regional partners to look for funding at the state and federal level to build out infrastructure resources that benefit the region as a whole, not just Arvada. So that's why we have those partnerships. And then finally, we have the implementation opportunities at the end. So Curtis will take the last couple chapters there. What's really interesting about the implementation opportunities is we start to talk about the rubber meeting the road and the next steps. Kelly mentioned that we've already had some success with the city team recently winning a federal grant that actually was more than the amount that the city has spent on the TSP, so that's great. There's 71 projects in total that have been identified in the finalized plan, and number one already paid for this investment, so you guys are doing a fantastic job there. And in addition to that, Curtis will cover some of the other things that don't require a lot of heavy infrastructure change that I know the constituents in the city would love to hear about: signalized optimization, so fixing the red light timing. So Curtis, that's his area of expertise. We'll have him up here for that in just a little bit. So the introduction, as I mentioned, this is kind of the introduction to the document. Basically here in the document you'll find an overview of the entire project. You'll find the vision statement. The vision statement is important because it's the guiding text that leads to all the other decisions that were made throughout the process. And the study area. So one thing I wanted to mention, and this is fascinating for me from a geographic perspective, Arvada is Swiss cheese. We have lots of unincorporated area within Arvada, right? We have jagged edges as well. So one of the first things that the team had to do is work with our stakeholder committee and our transportation advisory groups to make sure that we were capturing a study area that was appropriate. We didn't want to leave islands of unincorporated Jefferson County outside of the study area and say, no, we're just not going to include that. But we also didn't want to extend all the way down to Littleton because at some point the city has a geography it's responsible for. So developing the study area and the overview was kind of an interesting process in and of itself. The following chapter is the public engagement chapter. We have summarized a lot of that here on the slide, but there's more detail in there on how we interacted with the public over the last 24 months. There were in-person engagements. Many of you were at these engagements and interacted with us too. We greatly appreciate that. Taste of Arvada, the Arvada Days, the Trick or Treat Street were some of the in-persons. And also we had 2 online surveys that were open to the entire city. In 2023, we allowed folks to participate by letting us know where their specific areas of concern were, intersections or roadways. We received a lot of comment and feedback with that first round. And then our second round of public comment, we actually provided the opportunity for the public to interact with the specific projects and give us feedback on those and rank them. So robust feedback all the way around there, and that's documented in this section. And then also working with council, TAG, and Public Works Manager team. So that was wonderful to get all that effort and feedback. The next section is the start of the framework chapter of the document. I wanted to mention here, Councilmember Moorman, one of your comments was, how do we relate the TSP final document efforts to Sustainability Action Plan, greenhouse gas reduction? So you'll notice in that particular chapter, which is on page 32, we have added specific call-outs that reference our Sustainability Action Plan and how those goals interact with the goals in the Sustainability Action Plan. So you'll see those as asterisks underneath each one of the 8 goals. And I think that's really important because these plans ultimately do have to speak to each other, and I appreciated that comment in our last meeting. Off to the right here, you'll see this is also a part of the goals section on page 32. There were over 30 documents, planning documents, over the last 15 years that were reviewed, and key areas of consistency between those documents were measured, 10 of them. And those were used to help generate some of the goals that we came up with. So we're taking old planning documents, we're taking public feedback, we're taking interactions with our stakeholders, and we're developing the goals that we've talked about a couple times now. So just want to make sure that we're covering how all those are origined and generated. The next chapter, or subchapter within the framework section, is the objectives. So we talked about this a little bit with reference to the marginalized communities and disadvantaged communities. This is where we're measuring outcomes. And we can't just say, well, it makes it easier to get around. Okay, but by what amount, right? We actually set data points based on those early studies and evaluation of the existing transportation system, and we set benchmark goals for each of those. And the projects that come to the top of the prioritization list mean that they scored high in all of these categories, not just one. One thing I wanted to note here, this was a comment from Mayor Simpson about the changing funding environments. We kind of covered this already, but I wanted to make sure to call attention to this because we had a lot of internal discussion about it. We've developed a lot of tools with the TSP for staff to use to make decisions and to make it easy for them to move forward with the changing environments that we're going to see at the federal and state level and administrations. There was a request from staff to not overcomplicate their decision-making process, so they said, please, dear God, Mike, not another spreadsheet. I think we can navigate that. But it was something we discussed at length, and we appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, I really appreciate that.
No more spreadsheets. Yeah, they wanted to limit that. And then before I turn it over to Curtis, I wanted to talk for a second about this is my favorite diagram. I bring this up as often as I can. So any project that the city is going to eventually complete or has an aspiration to complete is going to fall somewhere on the project continuum diagram here, from the beginning being the scoping studies to the operational obligations that take place when a project is complete. There's a lot of steps. And if you look at the far end, it gets more expensive as we get to construction. Construction, if it's a pie, is like 90%, if not more, of the entire cost of an infrastructure upgrade. So the last 10% of that pie is everything behind it. That section is where the TSP funding structure operates primarily, because it's seeding all of these projects so that we can then go apply for grant funding. Now, there are going to be some that probably make sense to be funded with the TSP budget. Maybe they're trails projects. But for the most part, we're going to be operating in the scoping study and preliminary design areas. And I wanted to also note that down at the bottom is maybe the most important part of this is that you have public engagement for all of that. So that's opportunity for the public to weigh in and share their opinions. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Curtis to talk about investment development. Go ahead, Curtis.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Curtis. Good evening. Good to see you all. So the next chapter, the investment and development of the projects and then prioritization. Obviously, as Mike described, all of those goals and the percentage weighting factors all went into play with each of these so that they could be compared against each other. And then this is the list of projects that came out of it. And so you can see it covers the entire city. All aspects of the city have projects identified. There's potential investments for all different aspects, vehicle and also multimodal transit as well. And then, so once we knew and understood the projects, 87 as Thomas mentioned, we looked at the cost of those projects, and so we understand what that total cost is. So then we need to understand what is being allocated currently to improvements at the city of Arvada, and this is the CIP program that the city allocates. There's 12 different funding levels, projects that's shown there on the right for different programs that are funded out of the CIP. And so based on that, there's two near the bottom, the collector street improvements and then the arterial street improvements. Those two are very applicable to the TSP because that's what we're doing. We're improving those roads. And so we are reallocating funding from those two sources and putting it into the bottom category, which is the TSP implementation, so that we have some additional resources available to us to enact the priorities that are coming out of the TSPA. The funding forecast, as mentioned, there's a lot of volatility just with changes in terms of what's available. In fact, the U.S. Secretary of Transportation on July 1st just enacted the new Safe Roads program. That was something that's gone out to every 50 state governor and the governor's office, and requesting that local jurisdictions such as Arvada provide arterials, it's for improving safety of arterials, and so providing applications for that. And so we've already mobilized. It's great that we have this document in place. We have these priorities set. And so with that, we're able then to look at what can apply for us here in the city of Arvada.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Yes, yep. And then, so that's that one. Then implementation opportunities. So the funding opportunities, as mentioned, what we're looking at, even just the most recent Safe Roads, that's out and available. The benefits of transportation investments, obviously, there's a lot of benefit to improving the roadways. You know, we improve traffic operations, which reduces travel time, improves air quality. All of those elements are inherent. We also, through this, with the projects that we're proposing and the recommendations, we're improving safety, safety for all road users, but also just the fact of providing recommendations for active transportation, providing bicycle facilities. If you provide those in close proximity, it's shown through studies that it'll entice use, and so it improves exercise and mobility, and also just the way for a big proportion of the population to get around. So there's a lot of benefits even just outside of the transportation element, but also reducing traffic trips. Policy recommendations. The city already has a lot of policy in place. There's about 30 different programs of policy ranging from that. And so we've provided additional recommendations as it relates to transportation. You know, the SOP, we're looking at modifications as it relates to that. But one of those is the signal timing and coordination. And so developing a policy for improving that. Thomas is working a lot on that program. And so, you know, with that, we're looking at improving the corridor progression, and so that the signals are timed with each other. So currently, a lot of those signals have older technology. They're running different times. And so you can go from the green light at one traffic signal and just drive down the road and then hit the next one red. And so the plan is to actually set progression along those corridors. We need those signals to communicate with each other. And then once we get those established, set running a consistent cycle length so that they can be timed together. We are improving the efficiency of moving traffic on the road. That can also be a safety measure. Because you can time those signals to turn green at the right time. And what is the right time? Well, that's the time when that traffic is supposed to get there. And so if we know a roadway is posted at 35 miles per hour, we know how long it takes for somebody, how long it should take for somebody to get from the one intersection to the next. And so we don't turn that signal green early, we actually wait. So there is no benefit to somebody speeding on that road because they're just going to get to the next red light. So we actually time those based upon that corridor speed. And so signal timing improvements not only improves traffic efficiency, but it can also improve safety on the corridor. And then with that, obviously this TSP, we're finishing this phase, but we're not done. This is an implementable, actionable plan. And so we're taking this information. We've identified these priority projects. And so now with that, it's all about identifying how we get these accomplished, whichever phase that they need to be in, like Mike mentioned. And so thank you very much. We've really enjoyed working with the city of Arvada on this project, and we'll answer any additional questions you may have.
Council questions? Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
Thank you for this, and thank you for all the work. I know it's been a good 2 years, so thank you for all that. I do have several questions. I guess I'll start with the capital improvement plan slide. And I know that in our study session when we last met, there was an explanation, and I still didn't grasp it. So if you could explain the switch from arterial street improvements to TSP implementation. So just explain a little bit why that and how that benefits what we're trying to do.
Sure, yes, definitely. So, you know, looking at all the 12 different funding areas, those two are actually most applicable to transportation improvements as it relates to the TSP. And so it was through a lot of discussions with city staff in terms of where we can look at potentially pulling funding from. Those two sources, the collector improvements and the arterial improvements, really it would be a double We're not really actually taking away from those because we're putting them into the TSP priorities to improve those types of roadways anyway. And so it really just provides additional funding that we can look at specific projects from the TSP, but it is, collector arterial. It's the collector arterial bucket that previously existed is where we're drawing that from.
Okay, thank you.
Chris,
Do you
yep.
mind if I add to that just
Please
for
do.
a moment? Of course. So some of these topics are not mutually exclusive. So in the sense that while we still have a tremendous amount of accounts that remain intact, if we see a surplus of funds in those accounts, not concentrated on other efforts here at the city, they can be utilized where appropriate. So just to highlight a couple as examples, missing sidewalks. If, say, we find an adjacency to one of the TSP projects in a near vicinity and we're doing all that work, it may make sense to supplement that project with those funds. Or if it is within the TSP project limits, we would be at free use to utilize those funds in conjunction with our finance group. Adams County Transportation Tax is another fund that we receive from Adams County tax collection. And so if one of these projects was falling to Adams County, then we could allocate that to also supplement any efforts there.
May I ask a quick
Please.
follow? Mr. Lisberg, can you tell us, and it's okay if you don't have this number off the top of your head, about how much is that Adams County tax each year?
I got a spreadsheet. Give me a second.
Awesome. See, sometimes spreadsheets are helpful.
No. It varies every year because it is dependent on something in itself that fluctuates, but over the last handful of years, it's been a little over $80,000 in annual funding.
Okay, so and because what I'm trying to elicit here is I love that we have some revenues coming specifically for Adams County because the roads over there and the sidewalks over there really do need some attention. They need some love. So, but with that, just so folks at home understand, because I realize $80,000 may sound like a lot of money, how much lane paved road would that actually cover?
That one I'd struggle with off the cuff, but let me convert it to something like sidewalk.
Or a
You're
sidewalk would be great.
Probably talking less than a block of residential sidewalk.
Okay, thank you.
Can I yield back my time?
Okay, absolutely.
Thank you, that was helpful. So my next question is looking at this plan, and I appreciate, again, all the thinking about it being, a long-term plan that we're going to work towards accomplishing the different projects that are set out in it. Cumulatively, these priority projects that you've brought to the top based on all the criteria analysis you did, has there been an analysis looking at what cumulatively these priority projects impact will be on some of our priorities? So I'm thinking for example, as we talked about, reducing greenhouse gas, ozone, and other transportation pollutants. Is there an analysis or modeling that's been done to say if we were able to accomplish these priority projects over the next, so many years, the impact would be X? I'm thinking also about reducing vehicle miles traveled. Can we say that the impact would be this much vehicle miles traveled? Do you want to speak to that?
Yep, that's a great question. As part of this effort, we created a town-wide city synchro model. So every traffic signal is in a built transportation model. It also provides simulation. And so each project that gets developed, we can put that in the model, and there is measures of effectiveness comparison, and so you can see directly all of that, the air quality improvements, travel time improvements, even just with signal timing modifications, what ends up resulting in those factors. And so that citywide synchro model tool is a great benefit to be able to provide those comparisons before and after.
I would love to see that.
I love showing it. So.
Okay, I'd be very interested.
Yes.
Excuse me, and then my next question is related to other plans that we have in motion. So the bike master plan, for example, is about 8 years old. I think it's probably time that we update that. And obviously there's a number of projects here that are going to impact that, as well as our ADA transition plan. Those are the two that come to my mind. And so I'm curious to see an analysis of, again, these priority projects, how are they going to help us tick off those items that are listed in our other plans?
I'm going to turn that over to Ms. Van Bruggen.
Yeah, so those plans, well, I think with the exception of the ADA transition plan, but the bike master plan was incorporated in this. So those projects that had a transportation focus were listed within the projects, unconstrained project listing, and then tied in with different roadway projects that might be occurring. Yes, the bicycle master plan is something that we've been discussing on when an update would make sense. Now that we've completed the transportation system plan, we also have the comprehensive plan upcoming. So we don't want to put too many balls in the air. So we're looking at potentially in the next few years, looking at funding to be able to update some of those other plans that are kind of nearing the end of their life.
I understand that, but it seems to me that it would make sense that they all fit together, right?
Absolutely.
So I guess I just want to understand more about what's the thinking behind having, updating the bike transportation plans along with us doing this plan and the comprehensive plan. Seems like they all need to be done at the same time.
That's a great point. I think one of the things we've talked about with the bike master plan is a lot of those projects are still relevant. And so maybe it's looking at more of the policy side of things. As Councilmember Davis brought up in the last workshop, wayfinding, really starting to implement, also talking about maintenance of these types of facilities, ongoing costs, but also street sweeping and plowing. But then also taking a look at what was recommended and how we could potentially bolster some of those. So not just looking at bike lanes, but does this one actually make more sense as a protected bike lane? So really diving in and reevaluating. So I think what is in the bike master plan really does speak to what we've done with the transportation system plan, as well as what we will do with the comp plan. But I think there's an opportunity to build upon with an update.
Okay, I think that's good. And so back to ADA transition plan then, is there going to be an analysis of how this helps us get at some of those items in the ADA transition plan?
That's a great question. I'll pass it to Jacqueline.
We do owe everybody an update on what we're doing with the ADA transition plan updates. So the short answer is yes, that includes some reports and measures that we're tracking annually, and we can do some work to link those measures to the TSP outcomes as well. We plan to bring that back to you in a future workshop.
I think that would be useful. Thank you.
Councilmember?
I was going to say, as a follow-up, if you don't mind, Councilmember Mormon, so one of the things that was also really important and critical to this effort, because this is the city's first transportation systems plan or transportation master plan at all, is that we're looking at all modes at once. So something like the bike plan that's 8 years old, some of our other infrastructure plans that we had, all of the 30-plus plans that we looked at, all of the planned projects were pulled out of those and put into that big bucket of unconstrained projects. And a lot of them were standalone, like, we need a bike corridor here. We also need a roadway improvement project there. Now that's one project. And so that's one of the key outcomes of this entire effort, is that we take separate planning projects and see where they overlap. And it really comes together with the comprehensive plan rewrite, because that'll be an adopted, formalized document that takes all this and then codifies it.
I greatly appreciate that, and I just think what would be helpful to me and the public is seeing how those intersect, so that we could say, we've had this, for example, the bike master plan for 8 years now, and now we've got this new TSP, and we can say that there's a number of these projects now in the bike master plan that are part of the TSP and we're moving forward with, just to kind of really clearly identify that, and then when we revise the bike master plan, we can show that, hey, these are now part of the TSP. Are there other things that we need to be focusing now under the bike master plan, possibly?
And I'm going to draw on one of my colleagues, but I think we actually did keep track of all the origins of the projects. So we have that, it's in the, I think, the appendix. So we have the ability to go back and look. It would require some spreadsheet analysis.
What's fun?
But yeah, we did keep track of that. Great point.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Davis.
Thank you. And thank you for this. I am interested and excited So, Kelly, you wanted us to be like that. You know I am. Instead of spreadsheets, Venn diagrams. Oh, look at that. No, I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Mormon. Perhaps it's just something where it's check boxes. Here's what was in the bike master plan, and then over here is a corresponding TSP project. And maybe that would be helpful in identifying where all these different plans, 30 different plans, they all coalesce. And so we know that my pet program is not being forgotten. I think that's really important, that we make sure that we got everybody's interests covered in the TSP that belongs in transportation. And that's really exciting. So, but thank you so much. This was great.
Mayor Pro Tem Mormon.
Sorry, I have another question I forgot to ask earlier. We've been talking a lot about Northwest Arvada, and so I want to return to that a little bit because we are, it's been an exciting year or two. We're starting to see proposals for some major projects up there, like, Quantum Commons, Electric Steel, the AI data center at NREL. Those are all related to that area. And so, I'm starting to think, and I'm certainly getting questions about, well, what is the city doing to plan for transportation in that area as we could potentially see a huge influx of population over a short amount of time if those projects go to fruition and happen, on a significant short time frame. So, I'm just curious, how does this, I saw some things that were on the project list that relate to that area, but is there a comprehensive thinking about that area in particular and what needs to happen to get us ready for these projects specifically?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And the way I will address it is knowing that these projects are going to happen. We're pretty certain at this point, a lot of them. How they happen is a little bit foggier. So it's a little bit of a hard thing to plan for when we know that sort of the density of the change is coming to a particular area, but we can't quite hit the rough edges of it and understand exactly what it's going to mean. So one of the things that we developed, and I'll let you jump in, but was a flexibility to the way the tools work. So at any point in time, the city won't have to hire a consultant to do this. They could do it with the tools that we developed. They can add or take away a project or modify a project. So if there is a density change, for example, that can be modeled in the current tool set that we've delivered. The other thing that could happen is you could add a more robust or change the classification of a roadway so it can move traffic more easily or maybe accommodate more active transportation. And then it will filter through the prioritization motor that we've set up. So that way, anything can be added or adjusted or taken away or modified down the road, and it would still go through the same prioritization sieve that we developed using the public outreach and stakeholder outreach process. So that way, it sort of extends the usability out to sort of future unknowns. With regard to the area that you're talking about, I think I might turn that over to my colleagues and let them speak on it a little bit.
Yeah, so State Highway 72 is broken up into multiple segments within this plan. Throughout this process, and I mentioned earlier in kind of the next steps in looking at implementation strategies, we've recently applied for a DRCOG corridor program or planning study for State Highway 72, specifically between that 80th and 86th Parkway. And we're still waiting to hear back from that, but really trying to dive into what the land use looks like in a broader area, what the traffic is going to look like. And while we led the application, we received some support from CDOT as well as Jefferson County on that application. If awarded, DRCOG would be the lead for that. So we are starting to take those high priority projects that we saw, especially in that area, and try to identify what funding sources we can start working toward.
Councilmember Rupert.
One of the things I appreciated about your list is it lists the people that we have to engage who aren't us and not under our control, because a lot of these priorities require other parties, and the result is that these projects are no nearer completion because of that quite often. Examples would be transit to Candelas. Examples might be the bridge under the tracks on Indiana, completion of 72nd, the road or the grade separation. You know, all these things are very heavy lifts with other organizations, and so while we may have it at the top of a priority here, it's important to keep those other obstacles in mind. So I appreciate having that on our charts.
Yeah, and that was something we discussed in our study session, I believe. That was a comment from you and also Councilmember Marriott. You know, what happens if all of a sudden we become lead and we were just a partner or vice versa? And that I can tell you that will happen. And the 20-year space and the project list that we've got here, there are going to be situations where Arvada has to take the lead position. And I think this was a comment also from Councilmember Pfeiffer, is that that's the city's job. We have to advocate for the projects that we need as a community. So sometimes we may move into that lead role. And hopefully with this document and its update cycle and all the things that we start to know as we move forward as a city, we'll make the right decisions and we'll make the right investments. But you don't know what you don't know, so we just prepare as best we can.
Thanks.
I see no additional lights. Well done.
Okay.
Thank you guys very much for this. I'm excited. As somebody who stopped at 4 consecutive red lights on Wadsworth the other day, I'm very excited for this.
Great job. Thank you very much.
All right. Ms. Haley, are there any staff updates this evening?
There are not. Thank you.
All right, with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.